Good evening. Well, first tonight, some big breaking news. I can exclusively reveal that former Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pezzullo is set to be stripped of his Order of Australia. The distinguished public servant was sacked by Anthony Albanese for sending text messages to a friend of Liberal Prime Ministers Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison. There was no corruption or criminality involved. Yet I've learnt that there are now procedural steps in hand to strip Pezzullo of his AO. Pezzullo has been made aware of this move. As of 2023, only 46 people have had their honours stripped since the awards began back in 1960. And it's been reported that almost all of those were because of criminal or civil convictions. An award can be removed if, in the opinion of the Governor-General, a person has behaved or acted in a way that has brought disrepute on the order. Well, Mike Pezzullo was made an Officer of the Order of Australia in the 2020 Queen's Birthday Honours for distinguished services to public administration through his leadership roles in the areas of national security, border control and immigration. The award was given for his lifetime of work. Well, I asked former Prime Minister Tony Abbott today about Mike Pezzullo, and he told me, I regard Pezzullo as an outstanding public servant who worked for governments of both persuasions with energy and commitment. Of all the senior border protection officials from September 2013, he was the one above all who was convinced that the boats both could and should be stopped. In my view, his departure from public service is a serious loss to our country. I also spoke today with former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and he told me that Secretary Pezzullo was one of the most effective, capable and committed public servants he's ever had the good fortune to work with. Scott Morrison said from stopping the boats to establishing the Australian Border Force and his role advising Cabinet through the National Security Committee, Mike was highly respected for his intellect, insights and practical ability to just get things done. Above all, Mike was a great Australian patriot who always put the national interest first above all else. Now, here's the key point. Scott Morrison said to me, no one was more deserving of recognition in our honours system as a public servant than Mike. He is a big loss to the Australian public service. Scott Morrison also said he was an important internal voice to governments of both political persuasions on protecting Australia's national security. Now, Mike Pezzullo joined the public service some 37 years ago. He's worked at a senior level with both sides of politics. He worked for Labor Foreign Minister Gareth Evans in the 90s and then Labor leader Kim Beazley more than 2 decades ago. And that was when they first discussed setting up a Home Affairs super ministry. Pezzullo then went on to serve in senior roles in defence, immigration and Australian customs and border protection. But as Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison mentioned, he played an integral role in stopping the boats and in Operation Sovereign Borders. While he was highly effective, his hardline stance on immigration saw him become a controversial figure and an enemy of the left. There were also senior figures in the coalition who fought against the creation of the Home Affairs Department, including George Brandis and Julie Bishop. Malcolm Turnbull went ahead and created the super ministry anyway. There are some now in Labor who have worked to weaken Home Affairs and its powers. There was undoubtedly both a media and a political campaign to oust Pezzullo and to discredit Home Affairs. There were political games, with Home Affairs Minister Clare O'Neil accused publicly of white-handing Pezzullo long before he was eventually terminated.
Clare O'Neil's at war with her secretary at the moment. You see the review that she's just commissioned to try and white-hand Mike Pezzullo, the secretary of her Home Affairs Department.
I don't think there's any question that it's political. I mean, an important point here is that there's obviously a huge battle going on at the moment between the Home Affairs Minister Clare O'Neil and the Secretary of her department, Mike Pezzullo, who was a secretary when I was at the department. He's a first-class public servant, and I was very well served by him and by the public servants within the Department of Home Affairs.
Well, Anthony Albanese sacked Pezzullo in late November after a review found that his text messages with Liberal power broker Scott Briggs breached the Public Service Code through using his position to gain a benefit for himself, also failing to be apolitical and engaging in disrespectful critiques of ministers and other public servants. Well, the personal benefit wasn't money or salary or advantage. Pezzullo was already a highly paid department secretary. The personal benefit was supposedly having a personal communication channel with senior leadership that wasn't available to other secretaries. Well, this conclusion couldn't accurately be reached without checking the phones and messages of the other departmental secretaries, some of whom are long-term friends with ministers, lobbyists and power brokers. It's also the case that Pezzullo already had direct access to both the Prime Ministers he worked under, Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison. He didn't require the back channel through Scott Briggs. Now, Peter Dutton and Michael McCormack, among others, publicly defended Pezzullo at the time.
I can tell you from my time as Minister, Mr Pezzullo served the government faithfully, as he did the Labor Party when they were in power, and he was able to, I think in all of his interactions, put the country first, and that's what I think you've seen demonstrated in his work at Home Affairs. He had a passion for Home Affairs because he believes very strongly in national security and border protection. He had a background in defence and he served this country, both Liberal and Labor governments, for many decades.
So we're just breaking the news now that there are plans to strip Mike Pezzullo of his AO despite no corruption or criminality. This is a very rare move. Mike Pezzullo has given a lifetime of service to Australia, including stopping the boats, strengthening the borders. But now, because of his gossipy text messages with a lobbyist, he's facing having his order stripped. The tribunal that will consider removing the AO is meant to operate independently from government, although there is a representative of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet who sits on it. Ultimately, it will be the Governor-General, David Hurley, who will need to make a final call on this recommendation from the tribunal. He would need to agree with such an extreme measure. One source I spoke to today said that removing Mike Pezzullo's AO would only bring the honour system itself into disrepute because it shows that it would be open to bureaucratic interference.